In the Gospel of John, the book of John, is one of my favorite stories in the whole New Testament, and that's a story of Jesus and a blind man. There's more than one story of Jesus and blind men in the Bible, but this is perhaps my favorite. And we'll start off reading. Now as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And by the way, this was a very common belief at the time that somebody had done something wrong, or there wouldn't be physical infirmity, there wouldn't be physical sickness. You still find that, I think, amongst some Christian believers today. I belong to an offshoot of the Worldwide Church of God, which splintered and splintered and splintered again, and then went into heresy. Anyways, I think I picked that up in our church, even though we aren't. That's not part of our doctrine. But Jesus straightens that out here, because he says in verse 3, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. He constantly referred to himself as the light of the world. He said, too, as Christians, we're to be a light to the world, too. Also called us the salt of the earth, to season, as it were, society. When he had said these things, he spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. And he said to him, Go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. And there's a lot of discussion as to why he did this with the clay and so forth. Was this some sort of remedy or something? I don't know. Nobody knows for sure, but the best hypothesis that I've heard, the best guess I've heard, is that many times Jesus healed in different ways, and maybe the reason he did heal in different ways was to show people, look, there's nothing magic about clay, there's nothing magic about spit, there's nothing magic about spit and clay or anything else, there's no magic words. The miracle is the miracle, and the miracle comes from Jesus Christ. As far as that goes, this is a good time to mention about so-called faith healers. Do I believe, or should we believe in faith healers? No, not in faith healers, but in faith healing. Can God heal by, we're told the effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much. I believe that's in the book of James. Can God heal? Certainly. I mean, we see Jesus repeatedly healing, and in Malachi it says God says he changes not, he's the same yesterday, today, and forever. Of course he can heal. Will he always heal? Well, obviously not. Anyways, that's a discussion for another time. Let's go to verse 8. Therefore the neighbors and those who previously had seen that he was blind said, Is not this he who sat and begged? Some said, This is he. Others said, He is like him. He said, that's the blind man said, I am he. Therefore they said to him, How were your eyes open? He answered and said, A man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, Go to the pool of Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and I received sight. Then they said to him, Where is he? He said, I don't know. I do not know. They brought him who was formerly blind to the Pharisees. Oh, this is where the trouble started. Now it was a Sabbath when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also asked him again how he had received his sight. He said to them, He put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and I see. Therefore some of the Pharisees said, This man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath. And by the way, set the record straight here. I am a Sabbath keeper, and I believe in keeping the Sabbath. And I believe the Bible teaches that we should keep the Sabbath, and that's a discussion for a different time too. But according to them, he broke the Sabbath. And incidentally, that's nonsense. He broke their idea of keeping the Sabbath. He didn't break the Sabbath. In the middle of verse 16, others said, "How can a man who is a sinner do such signs?" Very good question. And there was a division among them. They said to the blind man again, "What do you say about him because he opened your eyes?" He said, "He is a prophet." But the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been blind and received his sight until they called the parents of him who had received his sight. It's really escalating, isn't it? I mean, everybody ought to be rejoicing, and look how they're carrying on about this. And they asked him, that is the parents of the blind man, they asked him, saying, "Is this your son who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" Did you get that? Whom you say was born blind. His parents answered them and said, we know that this is our son and that he was born blind, but by what means he now sees we do not know, or who opened his eyes we do not know. He is of age, ask him. He will speak for himself. His parents said these things because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had agreed already that if anyone confessed that he was Christ, he would be put out of the synagogue. And by the way, that didn't just mean physically they wouldn't be allowed to be there. That meant excommunicated, and then you had a merging of church and state, so to speak. Other than the fact too that the Romans, of course, they were under Roman occupation, but they were allowed to keep their own rules and laws for the most part. And it would have been economic death, to be kicked out. You would have been ostracized by your friends. It would have made life very difficult. Verse 23. Therefore his parents said, "He is of age, ask him." They were scared. They were afraid. You should never have to be afraid of your religious leaders. Verse 24. So they again called the man who was blind and said to him, "Give God the glory. We know that this man is a sinner." Now there's a presumptuous statement. It's also in error. Verse 25. He answered and said, "Whether he is a sinner or not, I do not know. One thing I know, that though I was blind, now I see." I told you I really like this story, and this is one of the reasons why I really like this man. I think you will too as we get further into the story if you haven't heard it. Verse 26. Then they said to him again, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" Well, there he struck a nerve. Verse 28. Then they reviled him and said, "You are his disciple, but we are Moses' disciple. We know that God spoke to Moses. As for this fellow, we do not know where he is from." Verse 30. The man answered and said to them, and listen, he's waxing eloquent here. He's getting philosophical. Doing a good job of it too. Verse 30. The man answered and said to them, "Why, this is a marvelous thing that you do not know where he is from, yet he has opened my eyes. Now we know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, he hears him. Since the world began, it has been unheard of that anyone opened the eyes of one who was born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered and said to him, "You were completely born in sins." They're wrong about that. They don't know anything. That's that belief I told you in the beginning, that if you were born blind, you must have sinned. "You were completely born in sins, and you are teaching us," and they cast him out. Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and when he had found him, he said to him, "Do you believe in the Son of God?" He answered and said, "Who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him?" And by the way, that shows you Jesus didn't walk around with a halo and a big glow behind his head. He looked like any other average Jew, any other average man of his day. And Jesus said to him, "You've both seen him, and it is he who is talking with you." Then he said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. And Jesus said, "For judgment I have come into this world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may be made blind." Then some of the Pharisees who were with him heard these words and said to him, "Are we blind also?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no sin. but now you say, we see, therefore your sin remains. In other words, what he's saying is, at least they're saying that they knew what they were doing. It's not real clear in the scriptures whether all the time Pharisees knew what they were doing was wrong or whether they didn't. And it's another discussion for another time. But culpability, knowledge of what you're doing, has a lot to do with it. Like I said, that's a discussion for another time. But back up to verse 34. They answered and said to him, that's a blind man, you were completely born in sins, and you're teaching us. And they cast him out. That means they excommunicated him. Disfellowshipped is what some churches call it. He's cut off, but he's cut off from the economic life of the community too. Probably couldn't even talk to his parents. However, bear in mind at the end of this story here, this man is looking into the face of the Son of God. I submit to you that he didn't have any problems. He's found, he's been healed by the Son of God. God will take care of him. Can't prove that to you, can't tell you anything about his history after this. This is something we can know in the next life. This is something we can know in the resurrection. But I would submit to you that this blind man, formerly blind man, really doesn't have any problems. It says he worshiped Jesus Christ. He may have gone on and become a follower of his. He may have died and gone in and, as we believe, awaited the resurrection and would be in the kingdom of God. That's the end of the story. I think that's a magnificent story. To me, this man takes on a personality. Got a lot of guts. Of course, you've been blind all of your life, and the Pharisees are going to intimidate you. Obviously, he wasn't intimidated. So this is the truth of God. We're blessed to hear it. I'm coming to you from Topeka, Kansas, and if there's any comments you want to list below, we do a Tuesday night Bible study at 7:30 Central Time. We actually do a Sabbath service on Saturday morning at 11:30. We do all this on a telephone conference line, and a very, very small group. We'd be glad to have you. Take care.